4 reasons we fear death. The Buddha's answer. A short reflection that's often chanted in Theravada monasteries states in part, I am subject to aging, subject to illness, subject to death. That's the standard English translation, but the standard Thai translation is more pointed. Aging is normal for me. Illness is normal. Death is normal for me. The extended version of the reflection goes on to say that these things are normal for everyone, no matter where. To be born into any world is. To be born into a place where these dangers are normal. They lie in wait right here in the body. That at birth we laid claim to, and the world around us is full of triggers that can bring these dangers out into the open at any time. As the reflection concludes, these are good themes to reflect on every day to keep us heedful of the fact that dangers are to be expected and are not an aberration. That way we can be prepared for them. Otherwise, we tend to forget, and our illusions of safety, when they're challenged, often lead to unrealistic desires for absolute safety that can cause us to create unnecessary dangers for ourselves and people around us. Danger is normal. It's an often overlooked feature of the Buddha's teachings that he identified the basis for all our good and skillful qualities as heedfulness, not innate goodness or compassion. Heedfulness. To recognize that there are dangers both within and without, that your actions can make the difference between suffering from those dangers and not, and that you better get your act together now. This is the heedfulness that makes us generous, wise, and kind. We're kind not because we're innately kind. In fact, our minds are so quick to change that they're not innately anything, good or bad, aside from being aware. If we're heedful, we're kind not only when others are kind to us or make us feel safe. We're kind because we see that kindness is the safest course of action, even in the face of the unkindness of others. This is why the Buddha told his monks, when they were ready, to go out into the wilderness to face some of the dangers there so that they could overcome their complacency and become resourceful in dealing skillfully with threats to their physical and mental well-being. That way they could learn to bring out their best qualities especially when confronted with the worst that the wilderness had to offer. Some of the most moving passages in the Pali Canon are the words of monks in the wilds who discovered, in the face of hunger, illness, and dangers from fierce animals, that the best way to keep their minds safe was to take refuge in practicing the Dhamma. Now, the Buddha wouldn't push the monks into the wilderness right off the bat. He was like a wise parent who provides safety for her children as they're getting started in life, and then gradually acquaints them with the dangers of the world, providing them with the skills they'll need to negotiate those dangers on their own. This is why so many of his teachings deal with issues of safety and danger, recognizing what true danger is, what true safety is, and knowing how to best find true safety in both within conditions and beyond them. And he didn't limit these teachings only to monks and nuns. He taught them to all his students, lay and ordained, because wilderness is not the only place where dangers abound, and monastics are not the only ones who can endanger themselves and others by holding to unwise and unrealistic notions about safety and danger. Complacency and the ignorance it fosters are problems for us all, so it's useful to reflect on some of the Buddha's teachings on safety to get his perspective on the dangers we all must encounter. Because it's hard to keep complex teachings in mind when you're face to face with danger. I'll boil the main principles of the Buddha's safety instructions to a few bullet points. That way they'll be easy to keep in mind when you need them most. The first point puts the remaining points into perspective. Total safety is possible, but only in Nibbana. As long as you're not there yet, you have to accept the fact that you'll be forced again and again to sacrifice some things in order to save others that are more valuable. Life in samsara is full of trade-offs, and wisdom consists of learning to make wise trades. If you forget this fact, you tend to float around in a complacent bubble of what you assume to be a karma-free zone where you can have your cake and enlightenment, and the people who live in complacent bubbles are the ones most likely to thrash around wildly, endangering themselves and others. When that bubble bursts, the next point focuses on the primary means for finding the total safety of Nibbana and relative safety in the world. It forms the basis for all the points that follow. Your most lasting possessions are your actions. Your body is yours only till death your loved ones at best, are yours no longer than that. The results of your actions, though, can carry well past death, so make sure that you don't sacrifice the goodness of your thoughts, words, and deeds to save things that will slip through your fingers like water. Specifically, this means that if you really want to find safety, your strategy can't involve killing, stealing, or telling lies. At the same time, you can't expose yourself to unnecessary dangers by taking intoxicants or engaging in illicit sex. These are the principles of the 5 precepts, and the Buddha taught them because they really work in safeguarding the people who observe them. If you really want to protect your loved ones and other people around you from danger, remember that the same principle applies to them. Their most lasting possessions are their actions, so the best way to protect them is to teach them to observe the same 5 precepts. If they're willing to listen to you, you can explain the precepts to them. If they're not, you can teach the precepts by example, which either way is the only way to make the lesson stick. To find some safety in the world, you first have to give safety to the entire world. If you're determined to observe the precepts in all situations, you're giving a gift of safety to everyone, in that all beings universally will be protected from any harm you might do. In return, you get a share in the universal safety coming from your present actions. If, however, you follow the precepts only in some cases and not in others, for instance, you can rationalize killing and lying certain people in certain situations, for whatever the end. It's like building a fence around your property but leaving a huge gap in the back. Anyone with any motive can walk right in through the gap. You can protect yourself from the results of your past unskillful actions by training the mind. The fact that we're born in the human realm means that we all have some past bad karma, so simply avoiding unskillful karma in the present isn't enough to protect you from suffering. Fortunately, though, while we can't go back to change our past actions, we can weaken the effect of any past bad actions by training the mind. The types of meditation especially helpful in this area include developing unlimited attitudes of goodwill, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity, developing your discernment in knowing how to stop causing yourself unnecessary suffering in the present, and learning the ability not to let the mind be overcome by either pleasure or pain. When the mind is trained in this way, it's like a vast river of clean water. You can throw a lump of salt into the river and yet still drink the water because it's so vast and clear. Otherwise, your mind will be like a small cup of water. The same lump of salt thrown into the cup will make the water unfit to drink. The primary danger from other people lies not so much in what they do to you, but in what they can get you to do. Their karma is their karma. Your karma is yours. Even when you're mistreated by others, their karma doesn't become your karma unless you start mistreating them in return. At the same time, the most dangerous people aren't necessarily those who are obviously mistreating you. Sometimes, people you regard as your friends can try to get you to break the precepts or to fire up passion, aversion, or delusion in your mind. In doing this, they can make you do lasting danger to yourself. This means, on the one hand, that you have to train yourself not to fall for the reasonings or to be tempted by the rewards that some people will offer you to kill, lie, or steal for some good cause. On the other, it means that you have to distinguish speech that's genuinely harmful from speech that's harmful only on the surface, nasty. Words meant to hurt your feelings or get you upset are harmful only on the surface. Words that insinuate themselves into your mind, getting you to develop unskillful attitudes or do unskillful things, those are the ones that can do deep, long-lasting harm. You can protect yourself from harmful words by, again, training the mind. The best protection against unskillful speech is to depersonalize it, and 2 techniques are especially effective in this regard. One is to remember that human speech all over the world has always been and always will be either kind or unkind, true or false, beneficial or harmful. The fact that people may be saying unkind, false, or harmful things to you right now is nothing out of the ordinary. Like all dangers, it's normal, so there's no reason to feel that you're being singled out for any special mistreatment. You can take it in stride. The second technique is to tell yourself when something harmful is being said, an unpleasant sound is making contact at the ear, and leave it at that. Don't build any internal narratives around that contact that will stab at your heart. You have ears, so you're bound to hear both pleasant and unpleasant sounds. But you can also develop discernment around how you use your ears and relate to those sounds if you can. Let the words stop at the contact. They won't present any danger to your heart. Obviously, these principles build on the working hypothesis of karma and rebirth, a hypothesis that we're told is no longer viable in our modern postmodern times. But none of us have to be prisoners of our times. After all, what vision of life does the modern postmodern view offer? Fish fighting one another for the last gulp of water in a shrinking pool, all ending in death. What made the Buddha special was that he looked for a safety that lasted beyond death, and having found it, showed others how to find it too. Along the way, he offered the possibility of safety with honor, something that modern postmodern views can't provide. The Dhamma is said to be timeless in this world, where death is so normal. Now is as good a time as any to put that claim to the test. Skillful fears. Halloween, a time when people think about fear and death, and it's good to reflect on the fact that some things really are worthy of fear. I know some psychotherapists who ask why the Buddha didn't include fear among unskillful mind states, and the answer is that not all fear is unskillful. If your fear is combined with greed, aversion, or delusion, then it's going to be unskillful. But there's also wise fear. The main wise fear is being afraid of the possibility of you're doing something unskillful. In other words, you don't have to be afraid of things outside or of things that are going to happen to you. You have to be wary of what your mind is capable of doing. We're living in fairly normal circumstances right now, but things don't always stay peaceful like this. And the question comes up, when things get difficult, will you really be able to maintain your conviction that you want to act skillfully, that you're not going to break the precepts, that you're going to be harmless in your behavior? That's something you have to be afraid of, being harmful, and the mind states that would make you act on the desire to be harmful. This is one of the reasons why we meditate, to find something really solid inside that's not threatened by anything outside at all, because it's usually through weakness that we tend to do unskillful things. So the mind needs to be strengthened, and there are 5 strengths that the Buddha recommends. There's strength of conviction, in other words, being convinced that what you do is going to have long-term consequences, so you want to do it skillfully. Then there's persistence, putting energy into trying to do whatever is skillful and to abandon whatever's unskillful. Then there's mindfulness, keeping in mind what's skillful and what's not, and keeping in mind the need to develop skillful qualities and abandon unskillful ones. And that leads to concentration, which is where you get your real nourishment. The Buddha compares concentration to food for the mind, the sense of well-being, the sense of rapture that can come when the whole body is permeated by breath, and the breath flows smoothly. It's nourishing to all the parts of your body and mind. That gives you a place where you can step back from other things both inside and out and can look at them to see what's really worthy of fear. This ability, of course, is the 5th strength, discernment. Discernment and concentration are both nourishing for the mind, but in different ways. I think I've told you of the woman who was a student of Ajahn Fang and who had advanced stages of cancer. The cancer would seem to prowl around her body, and she was constantly having to undergo operations to have this part or that part taken out. One time she was going to have to undergo radiation treatment, and she developed an allergy to the anesthetic. The doctors were in a quandary as to what to do, so she said, well, try just doing it without the anesthetic. And at first they didn't want to, but she said, look, I'm a meditator. I know how to handle pain. So they did. And she said she used all the force of her concentration to get through the experience. After it was over, though, she was exhausted. Ajahn Fang went to visit her at the hospital. The next day she told him what had happened, and he said, the problem is that you're using just your concentration. You're not using your discernment. In other words, you're trying to fight off things, but if you learn how to sidestep them, you don't have to fight them off. When you lay claim to things in the body or to things in the mind, and then they get painful, you've set yourself up for a problem. But if you learn how not to lay claim to these things, then when anything happens to them, you're not threatened. That's the real strength because it reveals to you dimensions in the mind that you didn't realize you had before. The parts that are not affected by anything. You can sort things out this way by figuring out what's constant, what's inconstant, what's stressful, what's not stressful, what you have to let go of by seeing that it's not self to find something. That's beyond both self and not self. That's how discernment takes you, beyond any danger or any fear. But all these strengths are motivated by the realization that the big dangers don't lie outside or with other people. They lie within your own mind. So your mind is what has to be trained. Your mind is what has to be strengthened and made secure. This is why all the teachings focus in on what you're doing, what you're saying, what you're thinking right now. Because these are the areas where the real dangers lie. As for the dangers of aging, illness, and death, the Buddha has you use them as motivation for practice. But he also wants you to train yourself so that you don't have to be afraid of them. They will happen. But if you develop the proper mental skill, you can experience them and not suffer. That's what the passage in the description of 5 future dangers is all about. Realizing that aging, illness, separation, and death are going to come. Social unrest is going to come. And you've got to develop these 5 strengths in the mind to reach the ashitan reached, to attain the ashitan attained, to realize unrealized, so that you'll dwell in peace and comfort even when aging, illness, death, separation, and social unrest come. So the Buddha's use of fear keeps pointing inward. Inward, the problem lies in here, but the solution also lies in here as well. As for fear of death, as he points out, there are 4 reasons why we're afraid of death. 1, we're attached to our body. 2, we're attached to the pleasures of the human realm. 3, we realize that we've done some unskillful things, and that there's always the possibility that there will be punishment after death for the unskillful things we've done. And 4, there's the fact you haven't yet seen. The true Dhamma, in other words, you haven't yet reached stream entry, so you haven't seen for sure that there is a part of the mind that doesn't die. Those are 4 fears you have to work past. And you do that by working inside. You start with your attachments to the body. Right. Now it's healthy and does pretty much what you want it to do, but as time passes, things are going to get less cooperative. The body that has kept repairing itself over and over again without you even having to tell it to stops being able to do that. The hormones change. It takes longer and longer to recover from excessive use of the different parts of the body. From that point on, it's basically a downhill slope. There will be few ups here and there, but it's down most of the way. So you've got to reflect on that and realize that you can't stay attached here. The same with your sensual pleasures. All of the things we like about sex, sights, sounds, smells, taste, tactile sensations. It's not the case that you're going to lose them only at death. Sometimes, well before you die, you get so that you can't see or you can't hear. Your taste buds get weird. All the senses start to decay. Where are you going to find happiness if you're dependent on those kinds of things for your happiness? All of this is incentive to find the true Dhamma inside, the Dhamma of the deathless, which is a place of no danger, a place of no fear. You use your fears about aging, illness, and death, not to get morbid or hopeless, but to motivate yourself to come to this place of no fear. So fear is something you want to learn how to use properly, something you want to understand. Which kinds of fears to develop, which kinds of fears to overcome. Realizing again that the dangers lie inside, but that the place of safety lies inside as well. So keep your attention focused here, for this is where all the necessary work gets done. The 4th noble truth, as Ajahn Fuang once said, when you follow a path, even if it's one you've followed many times before, you always have to pay careful attention, because today there may be new things on the path that weren't there before. Some of them may be dangerous. Some of them can be good. If you're not paying careful attention, you won't see them. You trust the path. It's always been the same path. You've walked it many times before. There's never been a snake there before. There's never been anything else dangerous. But that doesn't mean there can't be a snake now. And if you're walking in the dark, without a flashlight, you put yourself in danger. So you want to look carefully at where you're going. At the same time, as Ajahn Lee once said, as you walk along the path, there may be little plants along the side of the path that you can eat, so you look carefully, because paths can have both dangers and unexpected benefits. These are good analogies to keep in mind as you follow the path of the breath. You breathe in and out how many times in a lifetime? And as meditators, we've probably been watching the breath for who knows how many thousands of hours, but you never know when there's going to be something new. Something good or bad in the breath, or something good or bad in the mind, because it's the mind together with the breath that makes the breath a path. The breath on its own is not a path, but the mind interacting with the breath. That's the path, and it's going to take us someplace. When the Buddha sets out the Four Noble Truths, pay attention to how he talks about the relationship between the first and the second, i.e., suffering and its cause. For the cause, he uses the word samudaya, which means something that arises together. It's what you look for when stress or suffering comes. You want to look at what arises together in the mind along with the suffering. There's a causal relationship between the two. But in the pair of the third noble truth and the fourth, he doesn't call the fourth truth a samudaya. It's a magga, a path, in other words. The path doesn't cause the cessation of suffering to be, but it takes you there. There are many images and explanations in the canon that make this clear, such as the image of the raft going across the river. The raft doesn't cause the other shore, but it helps you get there. You put the raft together and you hold on tight to it as you cross the river. When you reach the other side, you let it go, because you're not there for the sake of the raft. You're there for the sake of the other shore, but that doesn't mean that you don't do a good job of tying the raft together, or that you don't hold on tight to the raft while you're crossing over. There's another passage where the Buddha says the Noble Eightfold Path is the path of karma that puts an end to karma. It's composed of a series of actions, but it takes the mind to something that's not an action at all. So the path is not a cause of the deathless, but it takes you there. This is why the image of the path is so appropriate. The path to the top of a mountain doesn't cause the top of the mountain to be, but it gets you there. So, as we're watching the breath and the mind together with the breath, it's a path, which means it's not the goal of what we're practicing for, but to get to the goal properly, you have to pay careful attention to the path. Watch carefully what you're doing, because there may be some unexpected things here, and you want to be alert enough to see them. The texts describing how the Buddha finally got on the right path give two different versions of which of the factors he first discovered. In one version, it was right resolve. In the other, it was right concentration. But the two go together. Noble right resolve is directed thought and evaluation together with singleness of mind. These are the factors that get you into the first jhana. You're supposed to put aside thoughts of sensuality, thoughts of ill will, thoughts of harmfulness. When you really stick with that, the mind will naturally fall into a state where it's pulling away from unskillful things. And you've got the breath right here to settle in on. So you direct your directed thought and evaluation to the breath. In other words, your inner chatter focuses on the breath. You want to stay right here, of course. This builds on all the other factors of the path, but it also brings them all to fruition. John Lee has a nice explanation, saying that when the mind is in right concentration, really noble right concentration, you've got all the factors of the path together. For instance, right view, your directed thought, and evaluation are looking at where there's any unnecessary stress bearing down on the mind, and are trying to do away with whatever's causing it. Here in particular, what in the breath is uncomfortable. What can you do to straighten it out? And once you've got a sense of ease in the breath, how can you make the most of it so that it provides a good place for the mind to settle down? As the mind settles in, which mental factors get in the way of making the concentration more solid and less stressful, what can you do to drop them? That connects directly with right resolve. You resolve on not going back to your sensual thoughts. You're going to stay right here and to show more goodwill for the mind by making it even more concentrated. Right speech, your internal chatter, is directed to the breath and the way the mind relates to the breath. Right action. All your activities are dealing with the breath and the mind together, adjusting them this way, adjusting them that way, to see what works in giving rise to a sense of ease. Right livelihood, you use that sense of ease to provide for the well-being and maintenance of the mind. Right effort, you Stick with it. If anything unskillful comes up, you just let it go and try to keep it from coming back. If anything skillful arises, you maintain it. You don't just let everything come and go. As for right mindfulness, the word mindfulness means keeping something in mind. In this case, you're keeping your breath in mind. You're also keeping in mind the need to protect your concentration on the breath. It's in this way that everything converges into right concentration. So that right concentration gathers up all the other factors of the path and makes them whole. It's good to think of the factors coming together this way, for otherwise, if you think of them as separate, you have too many different things to think about, like a mother chicken trying to gather up a bunch of baby chicks running around. Here we have only one thing to think about, which is, how is the mind relating to the breath in the beginning? The main focus is on the breath. When you're trying to get the mind into jhana, you don't take jhana as your object. You take the breath as your object. If you approach the breath properly, the jhana will come without your having to think about it. You simply think about the breath and evaluate the breath until you get more and more absorbed in the breath. That's when the sense of pleasure and rapture can arise as a result. Then you make the most of them. That's another one of the duties of evaluation. As you're evaluating the breath to give rise to a sense of ease, you also evaluate how to spread that ease around in the body so as to get the most use out of the ease. The Buddha compares this stage of concentration to kneading water into a ball of dough. When you're really good, you don't add too much water or too little. All the dough is moistened, and yet there's no water dripping out. What you're trying to do is to develop a sense of whole body awareness, and it comes best when things feel really good throughout the body. There's also a sense of singleness, of preoccupation, both in the sense that the breath is the one thing the mind is focused on, and in the sense that the breath fills your awareness here in the body, so that the body is one mass of breath energy. Then as you stick with this, the relationship of the mind to the breath gets more solid to the point where you don't have to do any of the directed thought and evaluation anymore. You're just there with the breath. There's a sense of unity, of unification. The breath and the mind seem to merge into one. You follow this through the next levels of jhana until you finally get to the fourth, where everything in the body is so well connected. All the breath channels are so well connected. The body is so nourished with the breath that you don't even have to breathe in and out. It's not because you're suppressing the breath. It's simply because there's no need for it. The breath energy feels full in the body. The body's oxygen needs are apparently met by the exchange at the skin. Because your mind is so still, the brain is using a lot less oxygen, so you can be very still right here, without feeling any need to breathe. There are 4 jhanas, but when the Buddha talks about noble right concentration, he adds a 5th factor. He calls it having your theme well in hand. In other words, you're able to step back a little bit from what you're doing when you're thoroughly in a state of concentration. You're here planted with the breath. There's not much thinking around that sense of oneness, aside from simply the perception that holds you there. But for the 5th factor, the Buddha gives images of a person sitting, looking at someone, lying down, or of a person standing up, looking at a person sitting. In other words, your focal point shifts slightly to the mind, observing your mind as it's related to the breath. You're pulling out a little bit, using a smidgen of directed thought and evaluation, asking questions that build on the lessons you've learned about how to deal with uncomfortable breathing, how to make it more comfortable, and how to make use of that sense of comfort and applying them directly to the mind. Now, those questions actually fall under the terms of the 4 noble truths. Where's the stress? What's causing it? What can be done to put an end to it? So you step back a little bit to watch the mind and apply the questions of the 4 noble truths to your concentration. It's at this point where you're looking not only at the breath, but also at the mind in relationship to the breath. That right concentration becomes noble. Right concentration. You're here with one object, but you're examining it and seeing how the mind relates to objects. What does it mean to relate to an object? What kind of relationships do you have going on? What are the activities that keep these relationships going? Even when the mind is very, very still, there are still some subtle feelings. and perceptions and thought constructs hovering around the object, maintaining that relationship. It's when you see this that you can go on to the next stage, which is to gain some dispassion for even this state of concentration. Prior to that, you settle into the concentration, and as the Buddha says, you indulge in it. There's nothing else you have to do. Nowhere else you have to go. You're right here, and you can use that level of involvement in the concentration to help peel away a lot of really gross defilements. Because as you leave concentration and the mind picks up greed or aversion or delusion, you see how gross those things are. The mind inclines to not go for them because it's got a better point of view, a better perspective, coming from a better place to stay when the defilements are clamoring for instant gratification. You see, you've got this alternative form of pleasure, the pleasure of concentration right here to feed them. You've got this comfortable way of breathing. It's free, it's immediate, it's visceral. Just that fact can help peel away a lot of the peel of things you were attached to before. But ultimately, you use that ability to step back, to take apart the concentration itself when you see that even in these really nice states of stillness, there's still some fabrication going on. There's still some inconstancy in the feelings and perceptions. Things go up and down. The level of pleasure goes up and down. The level of stress goes up and down. It's very delicate and subtle, but it's there when the mind can see that and gain some dispassion for it. That's when it opens up to another dimension, which is not right concentration or right view. We're not here for the purpose of right view, or for any of the other factors of the path we use them. They are all activities, even right view, which we tend to see as the mind's picture of things standing apart from its activities. We see it as the theory as opposed to the practice. That's what it seems to be. But as you actually observe your mind in action, you begin to realize that right view is not a theory apart from the practice. It's an action, and so it's part of the practice. Everything we do when we're talking about the Dhamma is all part of the practice, and all the factors come together, here where the mind can observe itself carefully, in stillness, and see what's worth holding on to and what's not, letting go of what's not at the point where it doesn't have to hold on to anything. That's the karma that puts an end to karma. So this is the path we're following right here. As we're bringing the mind to the breath, it's a matter of being very observant of what you meet along the path. There may be some surprises. So even though the path is not what you're here for, don't keep glancing down toward the end of the path, saying, gee, when am I going to get there? Say, I'm right here. I've got to look very carefully right here where I'm placing my feet, because who knows what's going to come up in the path tonight. The path and the goal are two separate things, but their duties are not separate. It's in the act of observing yourself as you develop the path that you get to realize the end of suffering. Always be alert as you walk along the path, because it's the only way you get to see things you never saw before. Or as the Buddha says, to obtain the as yet unobtained, to reach the as yet unreached, to realize the as yet unrealized. That's what this truth is for.